Hello and welcome to the great White North, your destination for the iciest cold takes from the frozen tundra of the north. I'm your host, Charles Constantine, and with me is NP. Say hello, NP.
Hello.
How you doing today?
Good. I just moved places, so my legs are killing me, but feeling good. Got a bit of workout in doing that. The old man
You need to
helped.
be doing, yeah.
I don't know. Is your
Lifting
dad old?
boxes. Is my dad old?
Yeah.
He's older. I guess 60s, getting close to retirement there.
Yeah. Mine's getting old. Mine's getting like past his retired grumpy phase and into a charmingly grumpy phase. So it's pretty good. He's consistently grumpy now, but like doesn't mean anything.
Right in that sweet spot.
Yeah.
Endearing, I guess you could say. It's pretty endearing.
Yeah. It sure doesn't like how those goofs drive in these conditions.
It is frustrating. I mean, those roads,
Yeah, nothing but
you
ruts.
can handle them, but some people out there, that's really the issue on the roads.
Especially if you're
Slew
trying to get
dikes.
across the Ambassador Bridge. That might be tricky conditions.
Well, not so much anymore. It sounds like they got rid of that protest on the Ambassador Bridge. I think last night.
Oh, yeah. Been keeping up with the news. I've been busy setting this up. But are all the boys okay?
Well, it sounds like they got 12 arrests so far from that, so that's not great to hear. But um, I guess something had to happen at some point in that regard, and I believe that's the bridge that had some of the highest traffic between the U.S. and Canada. So that would probably be the first target. The other thing I'm seeing coming across my feed right now is that the truckers in Ottawa have agreed to move out of at least the residential areas in the city.
Okay, well, I think they did their damage. I wouldn't be upset now if they get shooed off. I think they mission accomplished.
They made their point, and I mean it's 17 days. It looks like this is day 17, and it probably will still keep going. I mean, they just had a fresh new protest pop up in BC and Surrey. It looks like, so I don't think it's necessarily fading just yet, but
Good.
They definitely have created the waves that they wanted to make it, at least according to their goals. And I think the main takeaway is the way that it's delegitimized the Canadian government. I think that's what's really important about all of this, and showing the power of the working class capacity to affect some change, especially with a very weak-willed head of state like Trudeau.
None weaker. Never seen anything quite so like it in my life. I mean, we've had some bad PMs. We had like Kim Campbell. This is the home of Kim Campbell, and he sometimes makes her look good. I don't know.
Yeah, even libtards are complaining about how weak he's looking with all this.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, like that article you sent me.
Right. Yeah, this guy, this Andrew Cohen guy, journalist, he had a real big issue with Trudeau's response so far. And so he wrote this article, "The Ottawa occupation is the October crisis revisited. Justin Trudeau must be bold."
Wait, what did you say his name was? Cohen?
Sounds like it's Cohen.
I don't know if I've ever seen a journalist named Cohen. Anyway, weird.
That's a new one for me.
Go on. So he's comparing it to the October crisis. We're going to take a minute here to learn about the October crisis. In the 1960s, there was a Quebec socialist separation radical group called the FLQ, the Front de Libération du Québec. They set off a ton of bombs and even bombed the Montreal Stock Exchange, but their most notorious deed occurred in 1970 when they kidnapped the deputy premier, Pierre Laporte, and a British diplomat named James Cross. Pierre Trudeau, ostensibly the father of Justin, invoked the War Measures Act for the first time in peacetime. The police and military arrested about 500 guys but failed in negotiations, leading to the death of Laporte. Cross was released after 59 days. Now, back to our program. Oh, isn't that just perfect?
What an apt comparison. I mean, there's one-to-one overlap with that.
You remember when the truckers kidnapped a diplomat and premier?
Yeah,
Set off a bunch of bombs?
Yeah, that's exactly what's happening right now. It's almost a perfect repetition of the former Trudeau government, what they dealt with.
So this Cohen is calling for the War Measure Acts, is the implication.
It sounds like he's calling for something along those lines, or at least, I mean, not necessarily. I think his conclusion is to not give them concessions and to mobilize the military if necessary. And throughout the article, he is obviously calling this an insurrection in the same way they did with the January 6th protesters. Now, he, so I'll quote one line. So far, the mayhem has mostly been confined to the parliamentary precinct. So far, this is a very Canadian version of an attempted coup, slow, restrained, amorphous, which has generated a very Canadian response of ambiguity and acquiescence. As befuddled authorities scoff and scold, militants dig in. So what we see here is he's actually admitting that this really isn't that serious. He even says like there's bouncy castles in the mix, but he's still comparing it to a coup, and he's using this conception of the Canadian as this, mild-mannered, polite, friendly archetype. He's using that conception of Canadian to, say that this is just a Canadian version of what a coup would look like.
Oh yeah,
but these people are actually militants.
He's clearly never seen my uncle at a bonfire party.
No, I've never seen a weekend of quadding out in Alberta. No.
Yeah. Has he never seen Ty Domi fight? I don't know. Whatever.
Yeah, hasn't seen a game of lacrosse in his life. But that's what I'm seeing there is it's this use of the modern sense of Canadian identity to couch everything and reframe the narrative as in a sort of as a way to shoehorn this idea of these militants, these insurrectionists, going about everything in a Canadian way, and that way he can force this narrative that these are really dangerous people, just like the FLQ, like just as dangerous as the FLQ. And I think it's kind of pernicious the way that this modern notion of the polite Canadian can still be used, despite it's like this notion of us as harmless, which I don't think is a very good identity to accept. But it's even that's being used to make us seem dangerous when useful for the journalist narratives.
I think a lot of people mistake our humility and our restraint for harmlessness. I don't think anything could really be further from the truth.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the if we go to the underlying essence of Canadian, that's very true. I would say in the modern sense, the libtard sense of Canadian, it is really harmlessness. But in that more primal, to the extent you could say Canadian, the primality of the Canadian archetype, no, that is a misread of what this Canadian spirit really is. Now, where this guy goes with his article is again trying to relate it to the FLQ. He's calling the truckers kidnappers, wanting a ransom with the COVID restrictions and the pandemic stuff. That's how his comparison flies, and he's explained it in this way to he calls it's silly. He calls the activists gleefully use this extortion of kidnapping the city to erode the state, just like their anti-democratic soulmates elsewhere. So he's saying the FLQ anti-democratic and truckers anti-democratic, and this is undermining democracy is his.
It's a stochastic kidnapping. It's a nifty little rhetorical trick.
Yep.
Yeah, I got to keep my eye on these Cohens. They seem like a bright bunch.
Yep, they have a very interesting way of subverting the discourse, you could say. But what he's getting at here, though, and I find this very interesting the way he compares it, because when he says the truckers are undermining democracy, he's saying they're going about it because they are, pushing this idea of rule of the majority, right? Democracy isn't about rule of the majority. Democracy is allowing everybody to have their say, and if the minority needs to have a voice, for example. And the first contradiction I'm seeing there, well, the FLQ was the minority group in that context. Like, they were representing a minority that felt like they weren't getting what they wanted. They felt like they weren't having what the appropriate amount of say in the matters, in opposition to the Anglo majority. But he's still making this comparison of both the FLQ and these truckers are undermining democracy in the same way. But obviously, each group was appealing to one's appealing to a minoritarian impulse, and one was appealing to a more majoritarian populist impulse. So there's a contradiction right there in this narrative that he's pushing. And like, he basically just says, like, democracy isn't really this rule of the majority. It's about the integrity of the state, the preservation of order, and it's actually freedom from the noisy caravan. It's freedom from this, freedom from anarchy of the caravan. So basically, democracy for him is whatever benefits the state and really the powers that be. That's his tacit admission here. Is democracy isn't about what the people want. Democracy is about what upholds the current system and who benefits from that system. That's what he's interested in. That's why he's pushing this narrative. Like, they're obviously fine with disruption and anarchy if it's promoting the system.
Right. I can't imagine what his article. Well, I can imagine exactly what his article would look like if this was a BLM rally or something like that.
Absolutely. Completely different narrative depending on who it appeals to. And so this is this notion of democracy as not supposed to be representing the majority, about representing the minority. Again, they use that to say, okay, well, the minorities with, ethnic minorities, for example, that's what we want to protect. But that's not actually what we see here. Because this guy, when he's talking about defending the state and defending the system from these truckers, he's not talking about defending the ethnic minorities, the BIPOC or whatever they call them now. He's not talking about defending those people.
I think it's people of coloreds.
You could say, I guess that might be it. I'm not up to date on all that stuff.
But
what he seems to be, what he's actually interested in is the minority of the ruling class, the minority of the mercantile interests. That's who needs to maintain their say in the system. When he says democracy, he's talking about defending those interests. That's what the state is there to protect. It's not there to protect, to the extent that it appears it's there to protect the BIPOC or the people of color interest. Again, that's just even that is somewhat of an illusion to hide that higher level of, no, these oligarchs, these merchants at the top, they need the system to run properly without scrutiny, without majoritarian impulses. Now, I'm not necessarily saying majoritarian is the way to go, but he doesn't like it. He doesn't like this populist stuff. So when we go to democracy itself, well, obviously in the liberal parliamentarian system, that doesn't benefit us. That's basically what he's saying. It's not there to protect you. It's not there for an actual democracy. Even someone like Schmidt had this idea of democracy as, like what is the actual will of the people? Schmidt says parliamentarian democracy was this is exactly what we're seeing here. This protection of those elite minority interests. But a true democracy actually would represent these people. Like, why not protect the majority? Why are the majority not being looked after in this system? And I think that's the big takeaway from all of this is who's actually allowed to have a say? Who is actually allowed to express their grievances? Regardless of how silly some of these, bodily autonomy arguments from these truckers comes out as, why are they not allowed to have a grievance with the system?
Yeah,
and he's saying like that's the real issue here.
Yeah. Furthermore, well, we know it goes beyond minority majority because look at South Africa.
Right.
Whites are a minority there, and the same game is played against them as here. So it's not even hypocrisy. It's friend-enemy distinction.
Yeah, it's certainly part of that as well. So yeah, ultimately, this trucker thing, if anything, the COVID mandates, all that aside, has exposed a lot of the true intentions of the system and the people running it, and
Do you
it's
think
exposed a lot of the flaws.
do you think that that's readily apparent to your man on the street?
That's the only issue, I would say, is that they might be so focused on these wins in the area of COVID that I think that will distract from uh, these real wins. In my opinion, these big takeaways of the delegitimization of the system and their transparency with what they actually want. Focusing on that aspect of things and being content with those wins might make the man on the street miss out, which is why it's important to kind of bring this to them and say, well, why don't they want you to have a say?
Especially if Millennial Woes in his breakdown, I think Geo might have had a similar one. Don't quote me on that, but it's looking like it would be a smart move for the liberal order to throw Trudeau under the bus on this one, make him their sacrifice, and then everyone will really think we won. But that would be done to preserve the order as a whole, I think.
Yeah, I think if that, again, I don't mind seeing Trudeau get thrown under the bus completely.
Yeah, it would be
But
nice, actually.
at the same time, we have to be cognizant of what the real intentions there are, and yeah, so we don't want to get too caught up in the politics of COVID itself, because that's really, in my opinion, a temporary thing. We want to look at the broader understanding of the system, and again, what do they say when they say democracy? What do they mean when they say democracy? What do they mean when they, why are they comparing this to FLQ? If we can expound that, I think that is where the real victories lie, and being able to explain better that this is not a system for the average person, and don't take the easy wins and run. There's still more to it.
So, on this week's Cope Country Checkup, we have Justin Turdeau from Alberta. How you doing today, Justin?
Oh, fuck, I'm hanging in there. How about you?
Pretty good. Are you getting pretty riled up by this trucker situation?
Well, I'm excited to see it, and I'm in full support.
No doubt about it. There's been a lot of debate how much trouble these guys are in and whether they're accomplishing their goals. What do you think?
I mean, the system keeps putting out, articles and opinion pieces saying, okay, it is time to walk back these restrictions back, and the restrictions are being walked back, but they insist at every turn it has nothing to do with the truckers. And I just don't buy that. I don't think it was precipitated by the trucker rallies. However, if you see, for example, here in Alberta, Jason Kenney's response, it went from being like in the same time span as basically it took the truckers to get to Ottawa and blockade Parliament Hill. It went from being there's no timeline for easing restrictions to by the end of February to Valentine's Day to Wednesday of last week. So it just got pushed ahead and ahead. And I think that's part of the broader rightward, sort of more populist shift that the Conservative Party is taking both on the provincial and on the federal level.
Who do you think's gonna get that nomination for leader of CPC?
Well, it looks like it is probably going to be Poilievre. He's being groomed for the position, and sort of, yeah, he's kind of making all the right noises to appeal to the populist wing of the party, and also to be able to sideline the People's Party under Max Bernier, even more so than it already has been already.
Definitely. We were talking to Max saw about that last week, and neither him nor Charles had much too good to say about that situation.
No. What do you think? What do you think the direction that's going to take? Like, is that a positive overall or a negative overall?
I mean, for us, it's neutral. It's just a situation. It's just a changing reality on the ground that we're going to have to adapt to and deal with. For the country and for everyday quality of life, the positive is that probably some of the excesses of the liberal regime of the last 8 years will be sort of walked back. And this is assuming that he's able to form government, that the CPC is able to form government, which I think they probably will be. I'll put a lot of clout on the line here and predict a conservative minority government in the next federal election.
I'll do one better. I'm going to say conservative majority. Is my prediction.
That's a bold prediction.
Yeah, but I think we've seen the tide start to shift. I think it might start going faster and faster.
Yeah, it could be. Now, Trudeau's not going to go away easily. His family is essentially Canadian royalty, the Trudeaus, and so is his wife's, by the way. And he's a political machine. He was basically bred, born, and raised for this role and groomed for it his whole life. Despite his sort of self-mythologizing, even as like a drama teacher and a snowboard instructor, I don't buy that he didn't grow up his whole entire life knowing that he was going to be the prime minister. I believe he did. And he's not going to go away that easily. That being said, I also think there is a faction of elites that are willing to burn Trudeau, throw him under the bus, and give the Conservatives a victory.
What do you put the over-under on that? Because I was thinking, we were discussing earlier that they might try and sacrifice Trudeau in order to preserve the order as a whole, make him the...
Yeah, they get a kind of easy victory to placate people.
Yeah, I mean, if he does lose, I think that's exactly what will happen. And if you come out west to the prairies, Conservatives here despise Trudeau, and especially the older ones who remember his dad. They absolutely despise the Trudeau name. And for them, it's enough of a moral victory just to see him gone. Even if the Liberals formed a majority government, as long as Trudeau wasn't at the head, they would consider it a victory. Because they kind of look at it as personalities, not policies. And then if the Conservatives do win, I mean, 80% of the policy is going to be the same, if not more. But it's a moral victory just because Trudeau, the personality, is gone. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think there's value in them being moralized. I think the possible negative is that these people kind of going back to sleep, taking the win, and just walking home with it. But on the other hand, them having some more moral confidence in their capability to push back against what they dislike, there's value in appropriating that. So there's some give and take there, but definitely some potentials.
I've got a question for you guys. Is there anything whatsoever the CPC could do that would actually make you even partially support them?
Not realistically. I have never voted Conservative. I never will vote Conservative. I probably won't even bother voting, to be perfectly honest. But if I do, it's definitely not going to be for the Conservatives.
I'm not interested in them at all. I mean, like if you mean in this like idealistic, fantasy world, if they rejected Zionism completely, that would be great. But I don't think that's on the table for them at all. Hey.
Yeah, no, I haven't heard that brought up. Not yet. That's a 2032 podcast we'll do.
I mean, that's just something that's just not on the table.
Exactly.
You can't be. There's no anti-Zionist parties on the right in the mainstream anywhere in North America, Australia, New Zealand, or Europe. It's just something that doesn't exist. That's like the third rail. You can have anti-Zionism on the left, sort of like Jagmeet Singh, actually, just because he's like a brown person from the global south. He's going to instinctively sympathize with Palestinians, and he's made pro-Palestinian statements. But yeah, like what I was saying is, if you want anti-Zionism, you can only get it on the left from the NDP or from like the AOC wing of the Democrats if you're in the States. But it comes with a side of like fags, trannies, brown people, and you just can't get it without that.
Yeah, it's a weak, very weak version of it too.
Yeah, they really sort of like soft pedal the position, and they make it. What they do is even slightly more insidious. Like what they always do is be like, oh well, we just want peace. We just want everybody to stop fighting. Well, who's going to get that message is maybe it'll work on some Palestinians and convince them to be peaceful, but it's not going to convince the IDF to stop bulldozing their homes.
Right.
But what are you really saying when you're saying like, I just want peace between Israelis and Palestinians? What you're really saying is, hey, Palestinians, stop shooting rockets at them, stop fighting back, just be peaceful.
Yeah, and the only side that gets reprimanded for being too vocal about their cause is the Palestinian side. It's not like the Zionist side within that framing of the left's narrative. It's not like the Zionist side gets reprimanded, generally speaking, within their own spheres. It's always the Palestinian side. So no value there.
I mean, you'll hear valid critiques of Zionism and of the Israeli state. You even hear quite incisive critiques on the left and sometimes insightful, but when that filters up in the sort of the superstructure of the far left into policy and into the official positions that the parties take, it's always just so watered down as to be basically symbolic. And then even that is condemned by the kosher right as anti-Semitism.
Right.
So that's just the world that we live in.
Yes, not the tastiest of sandwiches. What do you think the dissident response should be as conservatives, and over the years, as conservatives swing from being pretty much liberals, like with O'Toole, to how they are now, which is slightly more right than that? Do you think we should change our response, how we approach the thing?
Yeah, we have to. And if the conservatives form a government in this next election, there's going to be a lot of people who start plan trusting on Pierre Poilievre. I'm seeing it already. People are memeing him as Big PP.
Oh no!
Like, I don't know if this is AstroTurf, like coming from the Conservative Party apparatus. Because another thing to keep in mind now is the online sphere of like meme politics is no longer just like 20-year-old guys on their computers, like just doing kind of like amateur political analysis. And it's no longer just what we're doing. Like there's party apparatchiks who are going out there and spreading memes. You saw this in 2019, the election campaign with Maxime Bernier.
Oh yeah, I was
some of this was organic.
Him.
Yeah, yeah, you would know all about that. Some of it's organic, but some of it is also like computer savvy millennials who have grown up on the internet are now the ones who are coming into these positions of influence, becoming party apparatchiks. They're going to be kind of like spreading these memes, and it's going to work on some people. On a certain segment of right wingers, it's going to convince people to plan trust on this big PP energy. The position of the dissident right has to be basically give it a few months and then start pointing out all of the failures of the conservatives and of kosher populism, and then present people with an alternative way of thinking, an alternative viewpoint, and then eventually also alternative organizations that they can be a part of.
Yeah, hopefully we start seeing a few of those pop up here and there. Won't say more than that here, but dissident should keep his eyes open always for that sort of opportunity.
And I think it's good to be keeping your eyes open for the those meme politics that we see. The good example, if we look back even just a year ago, was the Paul Gosar stuff in the U.S. with American First. You know, that guy obviously Zionist, a shill overall, but he's posting green line memes, right? He's posting those the green line with the cactus stuff, and people got all hyped because he's using our memes. Whoa, cool, great, like that's so based. And what did that do? So now all of a sudden he's caught all this energy from those memes that his campaign managers have appropriated, and then it all is just dissipated into nothing. So keeping your eyes open for those kind of tricks when it comes to Canadian politics is going to be key. And you got to, even if you see through it, you got to make sure the people around you are seeing through it too, because that can just blow out all the energy for something real. And we don't want to fall into that.
Here's a problem with that doesn't have an easy answer, easy solution is when you're pointing out everything wrong and all of the failures of the Conservatives, right-wingers will just get discouraged. And if you don't have anything that looks like a viable alternative to offer them, then they'll just go back to, well, what are we supposed to do? Who are we supposed to vote for? Like, at least he's not Trudeau, right? And if you don't have anything to present to them, which right now the dissident right doesn't, then you don't really have anything to say to that. You can tell them, well, just don't vote, but I think that's just not a satisfying answer to people. They want to, and I'm talking about people who are sort of like politically engaged. These people want to make their voice heard, and they want to make a difference, and they want to have a say in how the country is going. And if you just tell them, well, just give up on that, don't vote, stay home, I think it's not a very compelling message. You have to be able to present them with an alternative. And eventually, at some point, that alternative might have to be a political party.
Yeah, that's a very fair point. We see that in the UK with Patriotic Alternative. We see that in the US with NJP. So, yeah, it's not, again, in a Canadian context, it's not as compelling to just strip away and try and disillusion people without that alternative. So that's a very, very fair point, and we should be looking.
It depends on your audience. If you're talking to like some like millennial in a Telegram chat and he's plan trusting on the big PP, you can just blackpill him and just say, hey, that's not going to work, come join this whatever, like, active club or group or whatever you have, or you have to just like homestead and have kids. That message can apply to people like that. But if you're talking to like your 50-year-old like sort of racist uncle and he's plan trusting on the Conservatives,
I've got him.
He's not going to be interested in joining a dissident right like group of Wignats. So there has to be sort of like a alternative that you can present to people like that. And right now there just isn't. The only thing you can do is, you can just blackpill them, like I said, on the Conservatives and say, hey, this is not going to make a difference. Look, they're not really doing anything, this and that. And then what are you left with? So I think there is no answer for it right now. We're not going to solve it in the course of this podcast, but going forward for dissidents in the North American context, and especially the Canadian context, that's going to be something that we have to consider.
Well said, and I agree with all of that. Is there any place that people can find you, Justin?
No.
Good. Well, you might see him lurking around someday, but for now, staying very anonymous and respectfully so. Keep up the hard work out there, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, guys. Have a good night.
You too.
Take care. Oh no, it looks like you found yourself in the hot seat. In this game, you will be shown a word, and you can only answer good or evil. No further explanation. This is a rapid fire game. For instance, I'm gonna say broccoli.
Good.
All right, it's just gonna
That's
go
how
like
it works?
that. Yeah. We'll see if they
Great.
all stay that easy. So, on your marks. First word, marriage.
Good.
Carnivore diet.
Good.
Faster. Liberalism.
Bad.
Castle
Evil.
doctrine.
Good.
Seed oils.
Bad.
Ranch dressing.
Good enough.
Catalonia.
Good.
Progress.
Good.
Soylent Green.
Bad.
Faster. E-girls.
Oh, bad.
The economy.
Bad.
Wim Hof breathing.
Cool.
Paganism.
Good.
Girl sweat.
You.
Sunning your balls.
Good.
Conservatives.
Bad.
Dads.
Good.
Tap water.
It's fine.
Dinah.
Good.
Transsexuals.
Bad.
Terrorism.
Bad.
Shitposting.
Good.
BNs.
Okay.
Greta Thunberg.
Bad.
Dating.
Bad.
Women.
Good.
Usury.
Bad. Evil.
Bedposting.
Evil. Bad. Don't do that.
Sonorad edits.
He's cool.
Bashar al-Assad.
He's cool.
Fascism.
That's good.
Demon retention.
That's good.
Two dads.
Bad.
Violence.
Bad.
Russian blue.
I mean,
Too
Good.
late. War.
bad.
Word cells.
I don't even know what that is.
You lose. Hard work.
That's good.
Bodybuilding.
I mean, oh, not great.
Mr. Leahy.
Oh, unreal.
Toronto.
Bad.
Alex Jones.
He's good.
Otto von Bismarck.
Good.
9/11.
Bad.
Clowns.
Good.
Saturday Night Live.
Bad.
Pet ferrets.
Good.
Cat boys.
Bad.
Chimpanzees.
Good.
Birthday cake.
Oh yeah, good.
Bing, bing, bing. All right. Yeah. That was the hot seat. You scored 46 out of 50.
That's a passing grade in my class.
I won't
Personally.
tell you which you got wrong. I will
Well-
leave that to the audience to figure out.
There's lots of nuance I think that we missed, but you know.
This is not a game show about nuance. This is the hot seat. All right. We're here with Humbucker. He's going to tell us about the central banks and associated things. I'm not even really sure. I just let him on the show because we're related. But I'm sure it'll be good. Humbucker is also writing our intro song. He's a talented guy. He's not an economist, but he's watched enough, I assume, John Titus videos that he'll fill us in.
Yeah,
How you doing today, bud?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. And yeah, you mentioned John Titus. NP mentions him because I'm constantly shilling John Titus's videos to everyone who will listen. I think he's the greatest economy YouTube content creator. Best one I've found for sure. His channel's called Best Evidence. So if anything I say is somewhat interesting to people, and they want to go into something way more in depth where the guy is super knowledgeable and can really break it down and take hours to do it. John Titus is great, and he makes it really. He's good at making what can be a very dry subject really interesting with cool charts and visuals and stuff. So anyhow, enough shilling for. Yeah.
No, I was going to ask you, what do you, how would you describe your politics?
Oh, that's hard for me to describe.
Well,
I really don't know. I have a tough time with that. I am on the right,
are you on the
ostensibly, and
dissident right?
I call myself dissident right, but I think I have probably some more libertarian leanings than a lot of your audience might. But I don't know. I don't pretend to have the ultimate political solution, and I'm not going to pitch such a thing. I'm more just
whoa! No one's
try and-
pitching any solutions here. Never mind final ones.
Okay, good, because I have none. All I have is I was going to sort of try and break down what's going on with inflation for people who might not be that familiar with what's happening there, because we're hearing a lot about it these days, right? even the normie media saying, oh, prices are getting really, really high. Just one disclaimer before I carry on here. I'll tend to talk about the U.S. economy and their numbers, their debt, their inflation, blah, blah, blah. I know this is a Canadian podcast. The reason I talk about the U.S. is, well, for one, obviously our destinies are quite tied together. U.S. is the big dog on the world stage economically. And Canada's in much the same position. A lot of our numbers are, worse in one way, better in another, blah, blah, blah. But I think as the U.S. goes, we'll go. And frankly, it's easier to find info on the U.S., so that's why I end up talking about them more. But just know that most of what I say does apply to Canada more or less. So that being said, in the U.S., they recently had their CPI come out at 7.5%, which means...
What's a CPI?
Yeah, so it means from January 2020 to January 2021, year over year, the consumer price inflation number grew by 7.5%, which is huge. Consumer price index is, they take what they call a basket of goods. So there's food in there, there's energy, there's housing, and they all get weighted. And frankly, it's a really rigged number. They have all sorts of small hat tricks for how they manipulate the numbers to make it appear lower.
I heard a story about that, how Lyndon B. Johnson said that eggs have tons of cholesterol to hide the rising price of eggs or something like that.
I've never heard that, but I totally believe it. Yeah, they just, anytime the numbers are inconvenient, they go, well, that's really, like they'll say, oh, look, this textbooks now for college have color photos. So sure, the price has doubled, but it's because of the color photos. So they haven't really gone up in price. That's just one example I've heard.
Well, education has correspondingly gone up. So I think it was a good buy. I think that was a good trade.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Anyhow, you get the point there. It's a manipulated number, but even with all that manipulation, came out at 7.5% for January. The number they're supposedly supposed to be shooting for is 2%, and they actually had maintained that for the last decade plus. But then along comes the pandemic, and suddenly inflation starts to run out of control.
Is that a coincidence?
Not at all. Maybe I'll get into my beliefs on how it is that or what I believe the motives of what I believe was a purposely launched pandemic was. I believe it was largely economic. But I'll keep driving forward on inflation here first. So people are noticing this huge rise, and it's causing real political problems for the Brandon administration. It doesn't look good for them when people go to fill up gas and they're like, oh my God, it's gone to some absurd number. It's doubled in the last year or whatever. So the Democrats are really struggling with their approval ratings, and seems like they're going to get murdered in the midterms because of it. So they say they're trying to fix it. I don't know whether they actually are. But why is it happening? Why are these numbers going up so much? Well, you have supply chain bottlenecks. That definitely plays a part. You had a ship lodged sideways in the Suez Canal for a month. That didn't help the situation, and all sorts of things.
It was
like
extremely
that.
funny, though.
Yeah, it was. There were some great memes that came out of that one. But all sorts of things like that are happening, and again, I don't think that's a coincidence. I think they're staging these things. My belief, We don't need to get sidetracked in that. But anyhow, so that's one problem, is these supply chain bottlenecks. But what I think is the larger issue is this absurd amount of currency creation that happened during the pandemic. You can just go look at, maybe I should have provided one, but anyone can Google a chart of the M2 money supply or whatever, and you'll see that it just went parabolic starting in 2020. They just created dollars. Several reasons for that, but anyhow, so those are the two causes. But typically, when inflation runs out of control like it is, what happens is the Federal Reserve, which is the U.S. central bank, as most people I'm sure are aware, they step in and they raise the base interest rate. And so what this does is it drives up the demand for dollars. So, the dollars in the system become more valuable relative to goods and services. And so that slows the inflation number, right?
I follow so far.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
I'm with you. I'm a total money grug. I get swindled on a daily basis. Anyway, yeah, but you're making good sense to me.
Yeah, well, I still get swindled even though I've become such a nerd about this stuff. I wish learning about it would fix that, but unfortunately not. In any case, so yeah, inflation highest since the 70s. But okay, so in the 70s, what they did to get this high inflation problem they had under control, they had a guy come in and take over the Federal Reserve. His name was Paul Volcker. And he jacked interest rates up to 20% at the peak. Right now, they're still under 1%. But they could do that in the 70s. Because the debt to GDP ratio, and I sent you a chart, so I think
I'll add it in post.
Pull up that chart. Yeah,
it's up there now.
Sure. You can see that in the 70s, so the total amount of public debt held relative to the economic output of the country was way lower than it is today. I'm not looking at the chart at the moment, so I forget the number, but viewers can just look for themselves. So they were able to jack those interest rates up super high because they had a relatively under control debt burden in the system. But today it's over 100% debt to GDP, and governments and corporations are all leveraged to the hilt, and they would all go default and go broke left and right. And, pardon me, it would send us into a massive depression if they jacked interest rates up anything resembling 20% now. It's not going to happen, period, the end. They will not do that. The general consensus at this point is if they even get the Fed funds rate to 3%, that's probably somewhere in there will be the breaking point of this current system. So 20%.
Isn't prime right now 3%, or is that just in Canada?
You're probably talking about mortgage rates. That's a little different. Mortgage rates are always going to be higher than the Fed funds rate.
Oh, okay.
Fed funds rate, I guess, is that would be the cost for banks to borrow money from the Fed, I think is how that works. But it's the fundamental underlying interest rate upon which all other interest rates are built, if that makes sense. So it's always going to be lower.
Yes. I'm following again. I'm with you.
Okay. So now you're at a point where because of all this debt in the system, you're forced to maintain low interest rates, because if people have to pay high interest rates on all this massive leveraging, it's not just governments, they have out of control debts, companies and individuals, right? If we all suddenly have to crank up our interest payments and all this debt, everything's just going to fall apart. And therefore,
there's an argument to
Sorry.
be made that wouldn't be horrible. Some of us might
yeah,
have sort of the accelerationists and stuff like that. I don't know if they're around much anymore, but you know, the decline's going to happen. Some say the faster the better.
yeah. Well, I remember when Ron Paul was running for president in 2008, 2012. That's what he said they should do. Because even then, the debt problem was bad. Now imagine after 2 years of doubling the currency supply, basically. His idea was, look, we're just going to have to default. There's no other way out. And, well, there is one other way out, but that involves destroying the currency. He thought that's probably a bad idea, and I agree with him. So his solution was, look, we're just going to have to default on all this debt. And yes, it's going to cause a massive recession, which will last a few years. But that's the only way to restore sanity to the system. And then I suppose at that point, he wanted to tie them back to a gold standard, which may be a little aside there. Until 1971, the U.S. was on a gold standard. So theoretically, you could take your dollars down to Fort Knox and exchange them for physical gold. They got bogged down in Vietnam, and they were spending endless money there. And apparently some of the European countries at that time looked at the situation and said, I don't think the U.S. really has the gold reserves to back up all these dollars they're spending on this war. So they started to call them on it by exchanging the dollars they held for gold. And it was starting to cause real problems for the U.S. So Nixon came out in 1971 and said, yeah, we're going to temporarily, air quotes, suspend the ability to convert dollars to gold. And that temporary suspension lives on to this day.
You know, it strikes me that there's a lot of parallels between the economic decline you're describing and the cultural decline I've studied.
Yeah, right.
I
That's
don't know how to elaborate on that very well yet, but I think you could almost draw a one-to-one map with, like, in the 50s, we had social capital to draw on, and, you know, the culture could only get so messed up. And so they degraded that, just like they degraded the gold standard, etc. All the reality being pushed to the side in order to push leftist agenda as far as it'll go in any direction, be it print $1 trillion for Israeli air defense, or
yes,
or, you know, teach kids how to be gay in school. Went one for one. I wonder why that link is so strong.
Well, I think you could make a solid argument that maybe that was the turning point for when degeneracy really started to take control, is when we abandoned a gold standard.
Oh wait, it just occurred. I just remembered the common factor between the two things. Our viewers will know exactly why. The answer is self-evident, even if I don't say it here.
Yeah, okay. Right. There's a certain ethnic component, if that's what you're getting at. Certainly.
Maybe.
Yes, that definitely plays into it. I think we know who the people in charge of the...
Who owns the banks?
Yeah. Yeah, I think we can all fill in that blank at this point. No need to elaborate any further. But yeah, I'm just saying, you could definitely make a case that by abandoning the gold standard, these people lost their last tether to reality. And at that point, you can just say, well, we don't have to back our currency with anything. I mean, ostensibly, it's kind of tied to oil now. That's a different story. Let's not get too complicated. But really, the dollars are backed by nothing now. And they can just print them out of thin air. You want $1 trillion for some stupid war for Israel and the Middle East? Go ahead. Yes, money printer, go burr. Exactly. So, yeah, I think those two things are definitely related. I don't know which is the chicken and which is the egg, but they go together, I suppose.
Now I want eggs and chicken. So, carry on from where you left off. They're spending all this money. It's causing the economic woes we're seeing now. And they can't raise interest rates, and they can't destroy the currency, or can they? Is that
well, they're going to
have with the COVID plan thing.
Yeah, that ties in. So, sure, ostensibly this inflation is very politically inconvenient for them. The Democrats have a real problem on their hands because, frankly, people just vote them out if they think that the Democrats are responsible for all these rising prices. But on the other hand, despite it being politically inconvenient, I think it's actually policy of the ruling class now is high inflation is required. They're going to have to devalue the currency because it's, like I said, that one option is you default, you collapse everything and you start from scratch. Well, they don't want to do that because doing that means they're going to lose. It's very likely that in that chaotic process, they could lose their power altogether. Their power is their control over this currency system, right?
To some extent,
if you reset
I'd agree. I think it might have
there's
other
more to it.
it's
Sure. It definitely, I think we can all agree it's a major component.
Yeah, I'm with you.
And if they lose control of that, if things get too chaotic, they risk losing their control over everything. So I think their policy is just, well, we have all this debt, so let's devalue that debt. If we have 30 trillion outstanding in government debt, well, let's just print so much money that $30 trillion is, you can keep paying the interest on it. But it creates this snowball effect, right? So the more you borrow, the higher the number gets. So you have to borrow more and more, and it gets exponential. And I think we're at that point now where it's just running out of control. We're on the road to hyperinflation. And if someone's got an idea for how they can get off that road, I'm all ears. But I think it's just what's going to happen now. And they're basically, everything they do now is trying to control the rate that happens so that they can manage it. And I think they're just sort of playing it day by day and trying to do it as slowly as possible so that it doesn't get so chaotic that, again, they lose their control out over years. And hopefully in their eyes, they can find some way around it, out of it. I suppose they probably have some plan involving creating a central bank digital currency. I'm sure that's where they're going. But I don't know how having a central bank digital currency solves this massive debt problem. It's still going to be backed by nothing. But maybe they have some trick up their sleeve that people just haven't figured out yet. I don't know.
You were talking earlier how you thought this was related to the pandemic. I know there's a lot of theories floating out there about that, but I'd like to hear it explained here.
Sure. So, yeah, my personal belief is that I'm on the side that this whole thing was indeed a conspiracy. I'm a believer that the whole Great Reset and Build Back Better thing is indeed a plan long in the making, and that the launch of this alleged virus was all something that they worked out in advance. And I think I'm sure there were many motives for doing it, but I think people really overlook how large of a motive the economic aspect of it is. I think certainly the timing of when they decided to go ahead with it, that was definitely dictated in large part by what was going on economically.
Would this be happening regardless of the pandemic then, like this hyperinflation and all that, you think?
Well, I think they needed to have this pandemic because it gave them an opportunity to put the brakes on the economy and pump trillions of dollars into the system. It gave them an excuse to do that, and they needed to do it because they were they had a repo crisis in September 2019, and I'm not going to even bother trying to explain the repo market. Someone has to go on for an hour about that, and frankly, I'm too much of a brainlet to understand it myself. But basically, just before the pandemic started, the repo market had a huge spike in rates, and this was a bad sign for them that things were really about to break down in the banking system. So I think that made them say, okay, it's time to go ahead with this plan. And what that plan was presented to the central banks by the hedge fund company called BlackRock. BlackRock has been in the news quite a bit over the past couple of years. I'm sure a lot of your listeners are kind of familiar with them.
Definitely.
They're a giant.
They bought up most of the land and housing, or a lot, or not most of it maybe, but tons, right?
Tons. They did. In the wake of all this, because they're very tied at the hip to the central banks. It's a incestuous relationship these giant hedge funds, BlackRock and Vanguard, have with the central banks. And like BlackRock is a massively powerful company. People don't understand. If you look at who's the largest shareholder in practically every large corporation, I'm talking food corporations, banks, transportation, whatever, run down the list. You look at the top shareholders, you'll find BlackRock and Vanguard at the top of the list for practically everyone. So they have massive influence over markets. They have massive influence over individual companies where they stock the executive boards with their kind of people.
You just reminded me of a 4chan post I saw about this. What's the guy's name who runs BlackRock?
Larry Fink.
Yeah, but it was speculating that the woke culture was on his directive, that BlackRock would only invest if they did all the nonsense we were used to.
Yes. Larry Fink is, as you might imagine, someone you could check the early life on and not be surprised. And yeah, he has enormous influence. Like I was saying, because they're the largest shareholder in all these huge corporations, they get to decide who goes on the board of executives at all these companies, right? So that allows them to dictate how these companies run their business. Anyhow, so they had a meeting in August 2019 with all the central bankers. They got together in Wyoming, and they presented this paper, which anyone can look up. It's all right out there on the web. It's called Dealing with the Next Downturn. And basically, this paper just explains to the central banks how they're going to be able to deal with the next major financial downturn that happens. Lo and behold, a few months later, the pandemic and, the biggest financial downturn in a generation. And if you want to try and convince me that that's a coincidence, okay, but you got a hard argument to make there. I really don't think it is.
I couldn't possibly say. I mean, if you wanted to soft sell it, you could say that that they were just waiting for some crisis and that they were going to do this regardless, the next opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, you could. I can't prove this.
Yeah, the way you're laying it out doesn't. It seems
just
less
think,
likely.
Yeah,
especially given all the other corresponding conspiracy theories about the origins of it and all that.
Right. Yeah. To my mind, it's just that the supposed coincidences stack up too high for it to actually be a coincidence. But I can't prove it. If people don't believe that, whatever. I don't need to convince people of that. Point being, they got together and they explained how. Basically, they were explaining to the Federal Reserve, okay, next time the economy craters, here's how you're going to pump trillions of dollars into the system to re-stimulate the economy. Because typically what they do, we were talking about them raising interest rates earlier. Typically, to stimulate the economy when there's a downturn, the central banks lower interest rates. This makes it easier to borrow money, so it stimulates the economy. It gets things moving again, right? But they knew that this time, well, interest rates are already basically zero, so you can't lower them. So they needed a different plan, and that's what this BlackRock plan is. How can we stimulate the economy when there's a crash without lowering interest rates, since we no longer have access to that tool? How this affects our daily lives is going to become more and more apparent. People are just going to be more poor as our currencies are printed into toilet paper and the government continues, borrowing from the future to pay for their whatever is politically expedient for them in the moment. So, how do we deal with that as individuals? I guess, get out of the banking system. That's probably that's probably a good starting point.
Is that what you're doing?
Yeah.
How do you go about doing that?
Basically, in my opinion, I think the idea should be to buy precious metals. That's historically always been the thing that carries people through these transition times. When one economic system is dying, it'll carry them into the next one. But, I understand how a lot of people think, that's just stupid boomer rocks. So, everyone's got to do their own thing. I guess people should be gathering real resources that you can hold in your hand at this point. I think anything you can actually practically use day to day to trade with, or, food, whatever. Basically just get out of the debt-based monetary system and into real assets that aren't... Get into whatever the central banks aren't involved in, because they're in a real bad position right now.
I would count social capital among those things you can hold in your hand.
Sure.
Charles?
Yeah, I would echo what you said. Having a tribe, that I think that counts for more than anything else. A real tribal network, and just having less reliance. I'm not so sure the solution is completely decoupling from everything as it stands now, because I just don't think that's realistic for the average person. But being having a sort of a robust or an anti-fragile approach, where as this central banking stuff sort of loses its grip and the associated reverberations of that come through, it's those things like those real world assets and those tribal connections, and potentially taking advantage of whatever that next paradigm is going to be, the technology associated with it, whether that's crypto or something else. I think if you're aware of all of these factors, then you'll be in a good place, even if you're not completely decoupled and entirely self-sufficient. So I think all these things need to be taken into consideration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess the last thing I would say is I don't consider all this stuff that I'm talking about to be a bad thing. I actually, you know what? That's actually why I got interested in it, I suppose, in a way, is because I've come to realize it's actually the biggest white pill of all. Is that their system, which is so, degenerate and awful, is running out of gas. And we have a real opportunity when this whole thing finally has to conform to reality to replace it with something that actually makes sense and is good for us.
Well said.
Very well said. Thanks for joining us, Humbucker. That was really good.
Thanks for coming on, man.
Thanks a lot for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Oh, one more question. Are you
Sure.
bullish on war brides yet? Is it too early to start collecting war brides Kazakhstan style?
From Ukrainian ones?
Yeah. Oh, I guess. I hadn't even considered that. Well, okay. We'll do a part 2 sometime on.
Yeah, okay. We'll have to follow up on that.
Well, you're not an economist, but your only financial advice is to collect war brides.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah, we'll go with
We'll leave
that.
on that. All right. Thanks, Humbucker.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
That was Humbucker, another anonymous guest today, who you can't really find anywhere, but you don't need to. It's none of your damn business. Actually, on a side note, Humbucker is also writing our intro song right now. It should be good. It better be good, or I'll go. I know where to find him.
Excellent. That'd be real spicy, real bump up in production values there. So, love to hear it.
Yeah. As far as production values go, I think we're improving yet again. And our numbers improved last week on views. I think people are liking it.
Sweet.
Leave a comment if you're not.
Yeah, tell us if, like, really that's all that matters. Like, if we're doing terrible, you gotta let us know. If we're doing great, you don't really have to tell us. I don't need upcomings. I just need to know what to do better. So give us a shout.
We will be making these regardless. But yeah, you could give us a few pointers if you know. It's the right wing. You all got podcasts. You probably got tips for us.
It's some big long effort post in the comments, and if it's harsh enough, I'll read through it.
I will be deleting all negative posts, and I will be finding you. No, not really.
It's aggressive.
I'll be finding you in Minecraft and burning down your Minecraft houses. Let's see. So, we had DCC, we had the hot seat, we had Humbucker, tell us about the central banks. That about does it for this week.
Yep. We I think we've said what we needed to say on the trucker stuff, and again, we'll see where it goes over the course of the next week. But what's important is the broader implications, and I think we take that understanding going forward. That's key in all of this. And yeah, I think that's all we have for today. So anywhere we can find you, NP.
Same place as always. Find me on Twitter at neither P nor P, or on Telegram at neither pleasure nor pain. And I'm gonna go get a sleep because I've had a long week.
Yeah, I think that's a very good idea. Nice comfy day for a little rest. You can also find our show on Odyssey and YouTube.
And SoundCloud.
And SoundCloud. There you go. We got 3 different places. So go watch all 3 places and bump our numbers up. Thanks for tuning in. You guys had a good week.